the music connection that Pepper was asking. And I said I knew that he was in the school system, but I didn't know what his position was. And she was asking Ed Schremper.
And then at the end of his career, he went to citizen. You want to this one? Okay.
Good evening, and welcome and thank you for coming tonight. I am, first thing, which I tell everybody in the sanctuary, is if you have your cell phone and you're connected to our church's Wi-Fi, invite you to turn that off or ask if you'd be willing to do that. It helps the live streaming that we're doing for our program this evening be consistent and sustain itself through our time together. As we gather today, I just want to take a couple of minutes to introduce the Reverend Forrest Wells. Reverend Wells is a person who grew up in this congregation or spent much of his youth in this congregation, and it was out of First Church that he went into ministry as United Methodist pastor. He returned in many ways to this congregation, but most recently, before his retirement, I'll just leave that alone. As those of you who are familiar with me know that I tend to wander and walk around rather than just staying still, and that causes all kinds of issues for live streaming. So Ruth has this kind of imaginary box that she likes to try to keep me in while we're here together. But anyways, going back to Reverend Wells, the last association and connection with our congregation is he served as our district superintendent. And so as he was responsible for pastors and churches and what we call the Southeast District, he was our liaison to the conference and was here on a number of occasions, helping to provide leadership and to preach as well. Last month, and he's now retired, has a home in Door County, although I think he travels more than he's at his home in Door County. And a couple of weeks ago, he shared a presentation with the clergy group of the Southeast District on his recent travels to Israel and to the West Bank, and met with Jews and Palestinians in conversation through the Institute of Biblical Studies. And it was there that he shared some of the situation of that which was happening in a first-hand kind of way, and gave us some insight that we don't always get through the news and through the ways in which the television and the newspapers report the situation that is happening. So I'm thrilled that he is here this evening. He has a short presentation. There's an opportunity to ask questions. At that time, I'll just come around with a microphone. If you have any questions that you want to ask for conversation, so that those who are joining us through live streaming can participate as well.
Evening, and it's great to be with you, and thank you for the introduction. I think Pastor Susan may have a different definition of short than you do, or I do, but my presentation is going to be about an hour and then Q&A. So I would encourage you to, you're going to have questions, but write them down, put them in a text message, do something like that, hold on to them until the end. Also, whenever we're talking about the Middle East and the the challenges that are there now currently with the war in Gaza, all the events after October 7th, the Hamas attack, then there's lots of opinions. And I find that many opinions have little real knowledge and understanding behind them. So my presentation is going to try to unpack as balanced as possible what has gotten us to this point. And basically the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and the Palestinian people is modern history. It doesn't go back thousands of years. It is basically from about 1947. So it's modern history that we'll be unpacking. So after I do some of that, then about halfway in, then I'll switch to my time in March when I was there for 10 days on what we call a fact-finding mission. Now, I've been to the Middle East, whether it's Israel, Jordan, Palestine, the West Bank, Egypt, Turkey, over 30 times. And I've led groups to the Holy Land many of those times. So 1985 was my first time there. So I've spent a little bit of time and energy in learning and trying to understand the people. The fact-finding mission is different than the regular times that we're there, because the regular times, it's a combination of pilgrimage, of study of the biblical lands, and then, yes, we always want to try to get some understanding of what the current reality is. But the fact-finding mission was entirely focused on what's going on now. And then we talked to people from many perspectives. So we had official meetings lined up with individuals and with groups, whether church groups or NGOs, non-governmental organizations, rabbis. We crossed the gamut from far-right Zionists to the far-left total support of Palestinian and elimination of the Jewish people. So anyway, the second half then, I'm simply going to tell the stories from their perspectives, what they've been living with, and then we'll get to the Q&A after that. Now, it's kind of interesting to be here. I'm remembering, I'm sure many of you do too, 1970. I think it was 1970 when I was a youth leader with our MYF at that time, and we had a youth Sunday, and myself and Gail Sivley, we stood up there, and I led the congregation in singing "Bridge Over Troubled Waters." Okay, so maybe it was silly, but it's an interesting segue to what we're talking about tonight in terms of our Middle East conflict. Now, I'm going to stand it basically over here so people will be able to see the screen. I just start with food because, I wanted us in a nice, relaxed mood. Hopefully, you've already had supper. But before I get into more of the slides, I'll do a little bit more introduction, as in why is this important for us? For several reasons, I think. One, we're in a church now. We're in the context of the Christian community, and so the lands of the Bible have been important to us. Even if you've never been there, we hear stories or the story. And when it comes to the Middle East and the trauma of war and violence, the Bible is often misused in that background. So we want to understand perhaps more about the Bible, and because it is our government, you and I as taxpayers, that are funding much of the war against Gaza right now, it's probably a good idea to understand more what is actually happening there. So there's a number of reasons. You can probably pick up more reasons of why we're here. So we spent about 2 weeks in Israel, and the objective, as I said, was to know more about what was going on in the conflict there, and kind of people that we met with. We met with Khalil from a Bedouin community. We met with a reporter from the Jerusalem Post, Jewish. We met with a Jewish rabbi, Zionist, Haggai Ben Artzi. We met with another rabbi, Jeremy Milgram, two completely opposite perspectives. We met with the pastor of the Lutheran church in Bethlehem, called the Christmas Lutheran Church. And we met with Father Elias Shakur, who wrote the book Blood Brothers and has been an international known speaker. He's a Palestinian Christian. So some people wonder about the Christians that are in Palestine. Well, that was one of the original locations where there were Christians. You know, they were Christians before, you know, Europeans or we were, between Palestine, the Middle East, and Egypt. So we met with Muslim leaders. We were in a refugee camp. We were in a kibbutz. We were in an Israeli settlement. And I'll define some of those things, terms as we move along. But there's few crises in relationships between peoples and nations in human history that are as complex as this one between the Jews and the Palestinians. There's cultural differences between the peoples. There's diametrically opposed narratives of the stories of the Middle East. Those opposed narratives are historical, they're spiritual kind of narratives. And both sides, now I have to stop there for a second. There's no such thing as both sides. This is a multi-sided, multi-perspective situation that we have. It's easy to say both sides because we see the aggressiveness between the Israeli Defense Force and Hamas. So in our mind's eye, we see two that are diametrically opposed, but there's much more nuances. But for the ease of conversation, sometimes I will say both sides. Both sides see themselves as victims. So if any of you have done social work or education, you know that someone that has felt victimized is deeply hurt, deeply wounded, and often would have difficulty finding compassion for the victimizer, right? So the Palestinians feel victimized by 50 years or 75 years of occupation, an invading group on their land, the Israeli people. And then, of course, the Israelis, the Jewish people have a strong sense of victimhood going back from World War II and before. The sense of being, people that have been hated by many different nationalities around the world. And so they both feel a need to defend their rights, to defend themselves from their enemies, and to show the world the fairness of their cause and defeat their opponent. So in some ways you can say whenever a spokesperson for Hamas or a spokesperson for the Israeli government speak, they're speaking out of their own sense of identity and of victimhood, and they're trying to get us on their side. So we perceive, those of us that were there, and there was only 5 of us that went. There was 3 of us that were clergy from the United States, and there was 2 from Brazil that went. We traveled together, and the 2 from Brazil worked as journalists and peace activists there. So we perceive the Palestinians and Jews both wounded deeply in the soul because of the sufferings that they have gone through. For instance, we heard an Israeli say that she's going through a serious identity crisis, since despite having always fought for the rights of the Palestinian citizens in Israel, today she's stunned by the war crimes of Hamas, and now she doesn't know what to fight for anymore. We heard a Palestinian declare that what's happening in Gaza is an atrocity that will one day lead to vengeful new terrorist attacks of much greater proportion. We talked to a 12-year-old Palestinian boy, a resident of a refugee camp, who's in a wheelchair due to being shot by an Israeli soldier. Because if a Palestinian teenager throws a rock, they get a bullet in return. Anyway, so we've seen a lot. Now, let's start asking how did we get here? So we'll move to the conflict. October 7th, 2023. So that's the date. Hamas infiltrated the southern Israel. They killed 1,400 Israelis. They captured 222 hostages. There was vows by Hamas to attack again. And then Israel invaded Gaza to remove Hamas. So October, how many months ago is that? That's a long time ago already. So the first stop that we made was to go to the area of the Hamas attack, which was not far from Gaza. And remember, there was a Reem music festival going on, and over 300 people, mainly young people, were killed at that festival. And so though that festival grounds has been turned into a memorial site. And so that was the first place we went. We went from the airport to a hotel in Bethlehem, and the next morning got up and drove to Gaza, basically. Now, we can't get into Gaza, but this is only 4 miles from Gaza. So when we're looking at this memorial, and you see each stick, there's a sign, there's a picture of someone that has been killed or captured from that music festival. And while we're there, we're hearing artillery fire going to Gaza. So we can't hear the shells land in Gaza at 4 miles away, but we heard them launch. So it was very, very eerie. So we were right there. Now, the idea of Zionism, the goals of Zionism, which go back, Theodore Herzl, and that's in the late 1800s to 1900, was one of the leading authors, proponents, and is Israeli, a Jewish person, saying we need a place of our own. Now, this was verbalized before that, but he's kind of the father of Zionism. Spiritual political renewal of the Jewish people in its ancestral homeland of Palestine. That's a definition of Zionism, that the Jewish people need a place of their own in their own homeland that is free from Western anti-Semitism. So the anti-Semitism, some Jewish people will say, happened ever since the diaspora, back in when the temple was destroyed again in right after the time of Jesus. So the diaspora is the scattering of the people of Israel, the scattering of the Jewish community around the world. So there's been opposition, and there's been some anti-Semitism in all parts of the world that they've settled, and particularly in Western Europe. So, this is before World War I, this is before World War II, and this was Theodor Herzl's goal. Back in World War I, or before that, this whole area of the Middle East was under the control of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire had the area of Turkey and east of that, but all of this area. And after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire was conquered, when the Western countries won the war, then suddenly they had all kinds of territory to divide up. And that's what they did. They got together, the League of Nations or the generals together, and they started dividing up maps. And the maps that were divided up were even in Western and Eastern Europe and also in the Middle East. But we're talking about the Middle East now. So the land was divided, and European countries were given mandates or controls over various regions. And it was the British Empire that received the Middle East. And in their own mandates, then they divided up this territory from the yellow, and that was called Palestine. And that's an area for a future Jewish homeland. And then Transjordan was closed to Jewish settlement back as far as 1921. That's the area of the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan right now. So we have Jordan and Israel. Now, just so you know, biblically speaking or historically speaking, there's never been a country named Palestine. There wasn't even, it wasn't even on the ancient maps. It's, again, a more recent term connotation. I better not get too detailed, otherwise 1 hour will turn into 2. All right, so then we jump to World War II. After World War II, of course, there was the real concern about what had happened with the Jewish people and just the travesty of death. So the United Nations in 1947 announced a plan to divide Palestine into an Arab and Jewish state. In other words, it was being governed by the British to this point, and the United Nations, a group of politicians, they voted to say, well, this is what we're going to do. Let's take this country and give some of it to the Jewish people and some of it to Palestine. The Jews agreed, but the Arabs said no. They didn't want anything. Well, they vowed to do anything needed to prevent the UN plan from being carried out, and that led then to the war that occurred. Now you can see the dark blue area down here, all the way up. This whole blue area was to be the Palestinian area territories. And Gaza, see how big Gaza is in this area, and then the yellow is what was to be Israel. Now the Jews were outnumbered, but they had better weaponry, and so when the war breaks out, then they were able not only to fight off the Arabs, but they increased the land. In other words, the lines drawn by the United Nations suddenly were ignored and became something different. State of Israel was then created on May 14th, 1948. And this is a slide that's unneeded, but it's called the Arab-Israeli War of Independence. And so after that, there was a partition plan that was revised, and it may be hard to see, but there's red lines now around the purple, and it shows how the lines have changed. So no longer is this area Palestine, and this area is smaller than it was. And then Gaza is only this section, not the larger section. So Israel increased their land usage. Now, during that war, 1947, 1948, this War of Independence, 750,000 Palestinians were displaced. And by that it means, now the stories will vary somewhat, but during the war, they were told, just like people from Gaza now, there's going to be a war, you need to leave your homes and move out. In 1948, they were told, leave. When the war is finished, you come back to your homes. So they're still waiting to come back. So temporary, in quotes, refugee camps were established by the United Nations so they could return home to their property, but Palestinians are still waiting to return. And there's this old adage, nothing is so permanent as the provisional. So it's temporary, but it's been temporary since 1947. The numbers of refugee camps that were established then was in the dozens, and of very small pieces of property, like one that we visited. You'll see a slide of 12,000 people in about a 1 square mile piece of land, with basically huts for shelters and 75-80% unemployment and more. So then here we go. We're in 1948, and this is the modern state of Israel founded. And these lines are pretty much the same. This is the West Bank now. We term as the West Bank, Palestinian territory, and Gaza, Palestinian territory. So just a couple things to point out here. Number one, the territories of the West Bank and Gaza have never been autonomous. They've never been territories where the people of the land actually control their own future. And when people talk about a two-state solution, it's like, well, already got them all separated by a lot, and now there's a wall that goes around much of Palestine, much of the West Bank, and none of the wall is built on Israeli land. It's all on Palestinian land. And plus, there's 600,000 or more Jewish Israeli citizens living on settlements, and a settlement is a Jewish illegal housing community on Palestinian property. So if we go back to, again, the United Nations, how things are set up. So this was the armistice agreement, and agreements don't always last. There was a while where Israel had the Sinai Peninsula too, but eventually gave that back. A couple of key terms, the Oslo Accords, there's Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, Bill Clinton. So there was a movement toward some peace, but it didn't work. And even the accord was breaking down before Clinton left office. Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli prime minister, was assassinated by Israeli Jews who were opposed to him talking about peace. So that's how strong two sides can be. Shouldn't even be talking about peace. I was at the cemetery where he's buried, and this was a couple of years ago, and I was sitting there near his grave, and American Jewish people are brought over their birthright. It's called a birthright tour to take a look at Israel, and the Jewish folks are giving them history lessons. And the person that was giving the history lesson was talking about how wonderful it was that Rabin was assassinated, because now they can be stronger of having community. Now, again, that's somebody's opinion. That's somebody's statement. It's not everybody. So the Oslo Accords, I've already mentioned the size. Now the narratives are diametrically opposed, as we know. The Jewish story, as we're children of the Bible, we're slaves in Egypt, we're freed from slaves. God gave us the law and God gave us the land. The Jews broke God's law, scattered for 2,000 years, wandered around. Hitler tried to annihilate the Jews, and the Jews needed a homeland. So now we've returned to the land, and in 1948, the state is established. We're fighting for our survival. We're surrounded by the enemy, and we're trying to survive in our own land. Palestinian story, Arabs are children of Ishmael. Allah gave the lands to Arabs. Palestinians are Arabs who've lived in Palestine for thousands of years, not just 2,000. They're caretakers of Jerusalem at this point. There's the Dome of the Rock, the Golden Dome, which is a mosque right now, but sitting in the area where the temple, the Jewish temple, the Temple of Israel would have been. It's the third holiest site in the Muslim world, so we know that Israel is where three religions come together. It's a holy place for all of us. The Palestinian story continues. Jews are foreign to the Middle East, is what they would claim, because they're mainly white Europeans. Europeans didn't want the Jews, and they sent them to Palestine to colonize it, and the Jews displaced the Palestinians. Well, much of this is true. The idea of sending Jews out of Europe came up before Hitler. And actually, there's some documented writings that I don't know if prove is a word, but they indicate that Hitler was partnering with Jewish leaders before he was fully in power to say, yes, you need a homeland someplace else. So the first idea was to remove the Jews to another place before the Holocaust occurred. So then the Palestinians today are fighting to be free in their own land. So two different perspectives, right? Israel's version, they've been invaded by the surrounding Arab countries, and these Arab countries have vowed to annihilate Israel, kill the Jews. They told the Arabs to flee from their homes, and Israel promised citizenship to Arabs who stayed in the land. So right now there's about 1.5 million Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel, in Israel proper, okay? And then there's another 3.5 million of Palestinians in the West Bank that aren't citizens, and another 1.5 million or more in Gaza that are not citizens. But the 1.5 million or so that are citizens in Israel, they've got an Israeli passport, they've got Israeli citizenship, but they don't have the same rights as Jewish people. So, for instance, in Jerusalem, it's kind of divided up into West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is more Palestinian, but if you are an Israeli citizen, Palestinian, living in East Jerusalem, you cannot get a building permit to do anything different with your house. If you're in West Jerusalem, if you're a Jewish citizen, it's no problem getting a building permit. So if you need to add something onto your house and you're in the East Jerusalem and a Palestinian, and you add a room because your mother-in-law is going to come and live with you, then the bulldozers can show up and just demolish the whole house. So anyway, there's all different types of examples of there being two sets of standards for two peoples, even in Israel. So, again, I went over this. 5 million, these numbers fluctuate depending on who you're talking to, but 2 million Israeli citizens, 5 million in the other occupied territories. The Palestinian version, other countries invaded Israel. Israel drove people from their homes, and they erased the evidence of the crimes, and then Palestinians are now refugees. I wanted to just touch on this phrase that's been so much in the news, at least it was before, but the origins of the divisive phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. This was originally a phrase from Israel. It was the opposite phrase. So originally from the Israeli Likud party, it was in the 1977 party manifesto, between the sea and Jordan, there will only be Israeli sovereignty. And that all rhymed in Hebrew. Between the sea and the Jordan, there will only be Israeli sovereignty. So the Likud party holds that establishment of a Palestinian state jeopardizes the security of the Jewish people. So the Palestinians, they want to return to their home, and so that's where their version of the statement comes from. Now, the Likud party is still active, and that is the party of Benjamin Netanyahu. All right? So, again, in the party manifesto, their party manifesto is the idea that the only option for Israel is complete sovereignty over the whole territory. All right. Now we'll switch to the on-location part, and I'll share some of the stories. Let me catch up to my notes here just a little bit. I've got all kinds of notes for our 3 or 4 hour program. Okay, so moving on. So then, again, I mentioned that we're at the music festival area, and this is just one of the displays there. So it was really a touching time. I mean, that's a disaster of huge proportions. The people that were massacred, murdered, captured, it was not good, and I would not justify horrific violence by anybody for any reason. That's just me anyway. But the memorial, especially people that had hostages taken. This was interesting. No time for drama. I'm not sure exactly what they're meaning, but there is internal fighting, disagreement, demonstrations by folks that don't believe that the Israeli government has taken seriously the hostages, that the government is more interested in revenge and not worried. So there's lots of demonstrations and disagreements in Israel. I mentioned that then I went to get as close to Gaza as we could, and that was almost as close. We got a little bit closer, but you can see here the 4 there is 4 kilometers, so that's only, 3 miles from Gaza. So that's how close we were able to get. We also traveled further south, trying to get to Rafah, but Rafah crossings, everything was closed too, so we were turned around by the military a couple of different times in nice kind of ways. No, you can't go there. So And as we were driving down toward Rafah, as far south, then we could see out the windows of the car Gaza in the distance, and we could see clouds of smoke, the destruction close enough there. Now, by the way, except for this day when we were near Gaza, there was no other indication of war while we were in Israel. Unless you knew what was going on, everything was the same. You know, people were out on the beaches in Tel Aviv, the restaurants, the cafes, the malls, everything. Life was going on as normal. Now, Tel Aviv is very close to Gaza, and that's where a lot of the missile launches came. But, of course, talking with people, then they'll talk about their concerns and their fears. But visibly, there was no security threat. Even in the West Bank, going through security checkpoints, there was no increased security than when I've been there, tens of other times. So it's very surreal. Ever since 1985, how many of you have been over to the Middle East, to Israel? Okay. So I don't know how it was with you, but every time I've gone and taken groups, there's always been people with family members that would say, "Why are you going to Israel? It's such a dangerous place." How many of you got that kind of response? So, and that doesn't matter when you've gone, but it's never been my experience when I'm there that there's been any sense of insecurity. Now, stuff can always happen, but that's just an aside, because then when we were coming back north, we saw this installation off the side of the road, and there was a little parking lot there, and there was a little there was a bus that was there, and we just out of curiosity we drove in, and we got out of our car, and then we had a couple of soldiers start coming over to see us. But this was an artillery and tank artillery installation. And so these guys came over and talked to us, two of the soldiers, and they told us what was going on, and they said, "Well, stick around. We're going to do 4 live fire shellings," and so we were there when they were blasting away toward Gaza. So it was a very eerie feeling to be talking, passing the time of day with the military as they were shelling, and we were witnessing the killing of people. I mean, but they, they're young, 18, 19, 20 years old. That's the soldiers there, and they're doing their duty, and they're doing what they're told. After that, our next stop was to this village, Al-Sra. Al-Sra is a Bedouin village. Now, when you think of Bedouins, I'm sure you think of camels and desert and tents, and that's true in some places, but there is about 250,000 settled Bedouins in Israel. They're in Israel proper. They're not in the West Bank, but Israel has tried to put them all in one place or 2 places, but the Bedouins have resisted, and so there's a number of Bedouin villages. But you see down here, there is a bulldozer, right? So it's a sign they left up, because the Bedouin villages are what's called unrecognized villages. Unrecognized villages. That means that the government hasn't said that they can exist. And so they're all under threat of demolition, except this particular village. This gentleman shared his time of where the whole village is under the threat of demolition, but since he and his family had owned the property for a long time, they spent about 15 years in courts and were able to stay on their on their property, but it's still an unrecognized village. So what does that mean? It means no water, no sewer, no services of any kind, except for what they can figure out a way to bring in on their own. It also means that there's no police or military protection. So you've probably heard about the dome, the missile dome that protects Israel from incoming missiles pretty effectively. But if you're an unrecognized village, then you're not on the you're not on the radar to be protected. So when the Hamas attack occurred, October 7th, then not only Jewish Israelis were killed, but Bedouin people, Palestinians were killed because missiles don't discriminate, and they didn't have the dome protection. But so we went from the memorial grounds to the Gaza area to our first visit with a Palestinian person that told of the history and the challenges of being an Israeli citizen without the rights of Jewish Israeli citizens. We next met with Seth Franzman, and he's an author of several books. He's Jewish, originally from the United States, lived in Israel for a long time, and he is a reporter with the Jerusalem Post. So he's a journalist, and one of his books was After ISIS that he wrote. And so we had a pretty frank conversation there, and basically his personal perspective was that the war in Gaza was wrong from a couple of perspectives. One, that there's no clear end goal. What are we trying to do? And there is no clear plan for what comes after the war. So this is a journalist speaking. The Jerusalem Post leans right. They're Zionists. He's not opposing Israel as a Jewish state. He's just saying that it doesn't make sense. The killing or the massacres in Gaza doesn't make sense, and how are you going to really uproot Hamas? So that was his opinions. Also, he wonders, and I know there's been editorials written about this in Israel, but he thinks that part of the rationale for the war is for the political leaders to not be held accountable for what happened on October 7th. So I don't know if any of you likes the show NCIS, but I have for many years, and everybody knows from the show NCIS that the Israeli Mossad is the best spy organization in the world. All right, a little bit of humor there, but there's truth in that. So his point was, why didn't we know? What happened to our intelligence that it could be so bad? And if the Americans knew, people knew, but there was no preparation. Or maybe the thought was so much kind of pride in Israeli strength that we just weren't prepared. And plus, I guess a battalion, many troops had been moved from Gaza into the West Bank to help with the occupation over there, so that they were left without protection. So he said that whenever this war ends, then heads will roll in the government at Israel. That's his belief. And then we met with Munther Isaac, and Munther is the Lutheran pastor I was talking about, and he's written some books too. So he is a Palestinian Christian pastor of the Lutheran church there. This was his nativity that was used during the Christmas season. Jesus in the rubble. So some of you may have seen or heard that before. He has some phrases. I took notes on my phone. I haven't taken them off of my phone at this point. So if I can get to him in just one second here. Where'd he go? So he said a question that he gets a lot is from the Palestinian point of view, do you condemn Hamas for October 7th? And he had an interesting answer to that. He said that from his perspective, that kind of question is designed to promote the idea that the war began October 7th. So from his and other Palestinian perspectives, they ask the questions, it's all rhetorical, do Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? For the last 76 years, the killing of civilians has been wrong. Is resistance legitimate? So would you condemn Hamas if you had lived in oppression for 76 years? Israel has done worse without condemnation. The current narrative is designed to condemn the Palestinian people. Then he goes on, we were in our land, and the colonizers came in to occupy. And now it's the colonizers defending themselves from the occupied. So he thinks there's an obsession with condemning Hamas and ignoring 76 years of oppression. So, and then he went on to say that right after October 7th, every church statement, whether it's the United Methodist Church or the Lutherans or the Catholics or whoever, every church statement that was public began with condemning Hamas. And so he's just saying, in this, yes, horrific, but the whole context of these last 76 years were lost. In 1947, half the Palestinians were thrown out, and now there's really an apartheid system. Israel tries to maintain status quo with violence every few years. And the way forward is not really up to the Palestinians. The way forward is up to Israel because they're in complete military control of all the lands. The West Bank territories can be shut off in an instant. It doesn't take long. Anyway, so he had some pretty strong words to say. I'm going to move along here. Some of you that have been to the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem have never seen it this way. There's nobody there, right? So, and I've been there when you had to wait an hour and a half to get from where the picture was taken back to the altar area and down into the cave. But I just threw that out there. And across from the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem is a mosque. And one of the points is that until 1947 and the War of 1948, until that time, the previous violence in the Middle East, the last major violence in the Middle East was back into the 1400s with the Crusades. So that basically Muslims and Christians and Jewish people have lived together in the land all that time in relative peace for the whole time until the United Nations came along, divided things up, and gave Israel the power. We went to the Tent of Nations. Maybe some of you have been there. And Daoud is the owner of a farm. It's a farm, olive trees mainly is their main income, and I didn't put some other pictures, but this farm is just outside of Bethlehem, and it's a beautiful area, but it's also an area that has been beautiful to Jewish settlements that have come in, and the farm is surrounded by 5 settlements, and the settlements want his land. And so he's been in court and up to the Israeli Supreme Court for over 20 years. They are not allowed any permits to build on the land. They live in caves and temporary shelters. I mean, he has a home in Beit Jala, and they come out. But if they don't stay on the land all the time, the people from the settlements will come over and simply take it over. That's another story from some soldiers that you'll meet in just a moment that will say that the settlers, the people that are on land illegally building communities, have their own armies, their own militias, and even the Israeli soldiers or police have no control, almost no control over what they do. So it's a challenge. And Daoud shared about some settlers coming onto his farm with guns, and he thinks something might have happened, but there were some people from Scandinavia that were their volunteers that stepped in, and when the settlers knew that there were Europeans on the land, then they backed off. This is the entrance to a refugee camp. And a nun that was there, this gentleman, Ma'arai, I've known him for years, and he's a peace advocate. But even talking about peace, or even the Palestinians cannot verbalize public opposition to Israel, Israel injustice. That will be enough to send them to jail, and he's been in jail as well as this person. He talked about atrocities he experienced in jail. I won't go into those. On the right, on the left is my friend Antonio from Brazil. He's the peace activist journalist there. On the right is Hagi Ben-Artzi. Hagi Ben-Artzi is a rabbi, a Jewish theologian. He teaches at university, and he's one that has Polish roots that goes back hundreds of years, but he came to Israel. His family came to Israel, and I wanted to pull up a quote from him. If I can find Hagi, where did you go? So he is adamantly on the far right in terms of Zionist, and from Scripture, the Old Testament, he'll affirm God's given us this land. This is our land. We have been hated by the world. Everybody hates us. The United States hates us. Biden hates us. Go down the list of everybody hates. We experienced anti-Semitism. Even during World War II, he said that nobody cared. Nobody helped out the prison camps, the Holocaust that was taking place there. Now, I had my dad and my uncle were in World War II, so I had a little conversation with him. I said, Hagi, my father flew, and in his mind, he was there to help and rescue the Jewish people. And my uncle was shot down over Germany and spent a year in a prison camp, and he was there. So Hagi was okay, but anyway, but that's the mindset. And even now, he was like we weren't supported, and but we will never be taken again. there will never be another Jewish Holocaust again. If there's threats, we will use our nuclear weapons. And if there's a Holocaust, it will be a world Holocaust because the Jewish people are not going to be taken again. He said, it's okay if those Palestinians want to live here under our own rules. If they don't, then they should go to other Arab countries. So that's kind of his mindset. But that was the only person, that was the alarming thing to hear, how strong this sense of Zionism was, to the point of we're going to nuke other people that don't agree with us. By the way, this is the brother-in-law. Hagi Ben Artzi is the brother-in-law of Benjamin Netanyahu. We went to a kibbutz. Now, a kibbutz is a commune, a community that is in Israel. So a kibbutz and a settlement are two entirely different things. So we met with a couple people from one of the kibbutzes, and they were busy building temporary shelters because October 7th, when people were killed, then other kibbutzes and communities became uninhabitable. So they're providing temporary housing for a year or more for people from near Gaza, the Jewish people that lost, and also up near Lebanon, near Beirut, when there's fighting up there. So there's the two place war. So they're doing that for housing. And by the way, it was kind of interesting when we were traveling by car north of Tel Aviv, and we were getting close to Lebanon. Suddenly, the GPS went out. So the GPS is blocked up. And anyway. Now, people are people everywhere. So in this kibbutz, what did we find? A little lemonade stand. And so it's important, as we're talking about deeply troubling issues, and with perspectives that maybe can make us angry or whatever, we're still talking about people. So that was part of the instruction of us going in, talking with all kinds of different groups. We're going to hear some things that we really don't want to hear, but to be respectful, caring of people who are saying them. Sometimes we have to hold our tongue. But to remember that people are people. These were the two women. The one on the left is the one that for many years works with the Palestinian Jewish people, trying to bring connection. She was the one that said that she didn't know what she was living for now, or how, what would she do next. Again, she worked with only Palestinian Israeli citizens. She did not work at all with people from the West Bank or from Gaza. And so she was tormented so much by her own pain that she couldn't even verbalize any empathy for the tens of thousands children being killed in Gaza. So again, going back to a sense of victimhood. Then Father Elias Shakur, and he wrote the book Blood Brothers. I have a copy of it. You can't have it, but if you want to look at that. And that was his perspective of growing up as a child, as a Palestinian child in the midst of Israel. And this is in Ibilin, north of Nazareth, and he spoke about the challenges. His school has Christian students and Muslim students and Jewish students, but after October 7th, they had to, the Jewish students had to leave. It's just too hard. He has a couple of Jewish teachers, but building bridges over troubled waters is very difficult now, and part of the difficulty even is his being able to advocate for justice of any kind. He and other priests, and back to the Lutheran pastor, said that there is pressure by Israeli government that he can't say anything about Gaza from the pulpit. So there's a really oppression. Another thing that happened after October 7th is the panic reaction from the Israeli government was, well, we have to have citizens help protect themselves. So they handed out 37,000 guns to anybody that wanted them. So Father Shakur said, we've had Jewish friends, all of our lives here, and they come to my house for dinner. I go to their house for dinner. But now, if they come to my house for dinner, they're packing. All right? So the whole dynamic has changed. They worry about internal civil war among the Jewish people that disagree with each other, or about the Palestinians that are living in the land and what kind of policies or vigilantes or what may happen. So they have a lot of worries in Israel proper, much less Gaza and the West Bank. And this is his colleague that's going to be taking over the school. So I'm going to wrap up real quick here. This is a synagogue and a bomb shelter. It's a combination. And this is in a community. There's the synagogue piece. Jeremy Milgram is a rabbi. He's from Europe. He said, "This is not the Israel that I came to be a part of." So he came as a part of a spiritual journey that draws us all to the Holy Land, a spiritual journey, a community of diversity of people living together. And the current reality, he said, has sent many Western Jews, American Jews, back overseas because they don't want to be a part of what's going on. But he's married to an Israeli soldier officer, so he's staying. But he has a child that's in Tel Aviv, and another one that's in London, and another one in Germany. And it's just the grief of and the uncertainty of the future. And I think his first words to us was, "Well, the shit has really hit the fan now." That's typical rabbi language, right? Breaking the Silence is a very interesting group. This is a young man, Luis, and a soldier. So Breaking the Silence is Israeli soldiers talking about the occupied territory. So Luis and others that I've seen over the years from this organization are soldiers that came to a moral dilemma when they have been serving in the occupied territories. And the dilemma is, what right do we have to be an occupying power? But also, we're not trained as social workers or police officers, and we're just occupiers. The only response we know is if there's trouble, we use weapons. So this is one organization. It's just fascinating. You can look this up online and find stories there, breaking the silence. And then the last, this is the next to the last. In the Palestinian West Bank, even the territories that's supposed to be Palestinian, the West Bank, which includes Bethlehem and Jericho, for instance, is divided up into three kind of areas. Area C, most of it is administered entirely by Israel, so there's no input Palestinians, and you have to have special permission to be there. Area B, there's some administration by Palestinian Authority, but only 18% of the land is really administered by Palestinians. So the two-state solution that has been discussed for years, most of the Palestinians will say it's impossible, and it was always a lie. And one of them said, it's kind of like you Americans with the Native Americans. There were always treaties, and treaties were always broken. So anyway, he thinks that about the two-state solution, because back in the 70s, there was only 20,000 people living in settlements. Well, you could move them out of the West Bank, but now there's 600,000. There's all these cities that are built up. It's complicated. It's complicated. That's the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall. Up here is the ramp to get up to the Temple Mount, where there are the mosques there, and by and large the Jewish people don't go up, and the Muslims don't go here. And that's just a pretty picture. We went to the Holocaust Museum. It's worth a visit, whether here or I think there's one in Washington, D.C., and others. And the last person we met with was this lady from Beit Salem, and she is a Jewish person, and Beit Salem is, again, Jews against the occupation. So she said, the occupation was supposed to be temporary, but after 70-some years of occupation, it's not temporary. So people don't propose alternative solutions. They simply lift up what's happening, kind of the injustice or suppression of rights that are happening. And again, you'll be able to look this Beit Salem up online also. So at the end, what is the bottom line? What are the prospects for peace? People that we talked to were not very optimistic, no matter what perspective they were talking about. Not very optimistic. People from spiritual standpoints were still hopeful because they're not giving up the attempt of dialogue, not giving up the work that they're doing in advocacy in a number of ways. Even the Hagi Ben Artzi, said there's only one solution, and that's for Israel to be in control of everything, like they already are. But officially speaking, and on the other hand, Father Elias Shakur said the only real solution would be for the whole area to be one, but with everyone, Palestinian, Muslims, Christians, Jews, everybody having equal rights and equal voice, which would be a true democracy. So the idea that Israel is currently a democracy is kind of different understanding than ours. All right, sorry I went longer than I thought I might, but now we have time for questions or go ahead. So anybody, and the microphone's important because we're on the live stream.
I really appreciated your lecture. I always look to multiple side or views of a situation. There's always right and wrong on both sides. I just don't understand as a human being why we have to annihilate each other because we think differently. Why can't we we learn from each other? It's what I think it should be. I think there's a great much of education out there.
That's a good rhetorical question. It's, yeah.
Can you kind of touch base as to the difference or what Hamas is versus Palestinian Authority? I know Hamas is considered a terrorist organization, at least in the United States.
Right.
But are they part of the Palestinian Authority or not?
Thank you for the question. So the Hamas, you're right, is considered a terrorist organization here in the U.S. and by some other governments, and by some Western European governments are not considered a terrorist organization. They would see themselves as freedom fighters. But In the Gaza area, there were elections, and Hamas ran as a political party. So in Gaza, they won. The Palestinian Authority is different, and that is what is overseeing the West Bank. It ran as a political party also in Gaza elections, and this was a long time ago. I don't think there's ever been an election after Hamas got in. So the Palestinian Authority is a political party, a quasi-governmental type of group. So in some parts, the Area A, some of the cities, there are Palestinian police officers. There's some oversight of life by the PLO. And Yasser Arafat was part of the Palestinian organization too. He was not Hamas.
Is there a group that sponsored or organized your fact-finding trip? And secondly, is it fair to say that Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank have no citizenship?
Okay, yes, the group that we have used in Wisconsin for 20 years to lead our conference Holy Land trips has been the Society for Biblical Studies. So it's sbsbibletours.org, something like that now. So Reverend Peter Miano, he is a United Methodist clergy. He was a missionary, a liaison to Jerusalem early in his ministry, and then created this organization. So even 20 years ago, during the first Intifada, there's been a number of uprisings of Palestinians. There's been a number of times of war. Then he organized these fact-finding missions with the purpose of giving broad perspectives, an understanding of folks. In terms of citizenship, no, there's not a the people in the West Bank may have identification cards that can help them transit from one community to another, but some are able to go, for instance, into Israel, and some are not. So they don't have citizenship. Many, especially in the Christian community, also have U.S. passports. So I don't know how all that happened, but there's a lot of Palestinian folks that are part of our communities here, even in Wisconsin. Yeah, that's interesting. Yes.
I just wanted to return to Pat's comments about Hamas being a terrorist organization. You hear them compared frequently with Al-Qaeda. Is that fair? Is that correct? Are they both terrorist organizations? Is there any relationship between Hamas and Al-Qaeda?
Those questions are above my pay grade. I don't know. Some people have, if you look at Hamas's freedom as freedom fighters for the Palestinian people, some have drawn a parallel to back in World War II and the internment of the Jewish people and their own freedom fighters, that there was certainly a resistance movement by the Jewish community in some of the cities. But the difference was that some would say that they didn't attack innocent people. It was military targets. So what Hamas did October 7th was certainly horrific from that kind of perspective, and that would be similar to an Al-Qaeda then, that just lashes out. So it's a really good question of what are the relationship between the different groups and some of the governments and the area. We hear about Iran, Iraq. We hear that in Lebanon, it's Hezbollah that is ruling the roost there. So it's really, I'll have to go back more to figure that one out. Thank you, Woody. Anybody else? Yes. Oh, yep. I thought a hand was.
I appreciated your historical overview very much. Do you have any recommendations for books or other reference materials where you could go in and dig into that a little bit more? It's complex, and I know you had time limitations here, but so much of that seems to be still having impacts today.
I do have resources. I did not bring the list with me. So I'd be glad to send to Pastor Susan a list of some of the books or resources that you might delve in more deeply. And you're certainly right. It is so complex in terms of what's happened historically and then the people's responses that I'm glad you're interested in going deeper.
There is a lot to mine from what you've told us this evening. And thank you very much for coming and for sharing your views and what you saw there. However, we who live in the Western world have not taken cognizance of the Balfour Declaration, because you have to start from there. You mentioned Zionism and Husserl. Husserl didn't want Israel to be a Zionist state, but he wanted a home for Jews. We are complicit in this tragedy. If Israel has built over 600,000 or has built houses for over 600,000 settlers, we are guilty of something. Let's put it that way. However, I think I've mentioned this sometime here in the past. The leaders of the Palestinian people failed the Palestinian people. Because if you go back to the United Nations, I mentioned somebody's name, Zafrullah Khan. He represented Pakistan at the United Nations. And he argued for this state, for the Palestinian people, but he didn't win in that argument because Arabs disagreed with it. Arabs are also complicit. All their forces from 1948, Six-Day War, and all of that, they haven't been able to dislodge Israel from the occupied territories. Jimmy Carter wrote a book about apartheid in Israel. We have to go to find that book and read it. History is very messy, very, very messy. Sometimes it's imperialism, sometimes it's colonialism, sometimes it's the other, because Palestinians are the other, and they've been treated as the other.
Yeah, you've raised up a lot of names and terms, and so actually the two questions were similar. What are the resources? And now you're going back to the Balfour Declaration and beyond. So it's messy, and there's so much detail to trace history about how we got to where we are now. And unfortunately, we can't turn the clock back. So the question is going to be how to move forward, and we need to be aware of our own United States Western complicity in whatever. You know, and you're right, your Palestinian leadership, that is often pointed out. One of the justifications Israel is giving now, speaking of that, for bombings or the ground plan into Gaza, is that the Palestinian government is using people as shields. Right? You've heard that. Well. The fellow Antonio from Brazil, he works in the favelas, the impoverished communities in Rio that are being run by the gangs, and he equates the gangs to the mafia to the Palestinians, so that if you're in an area that's being controlled by a group, and your penalty for speaking out or opposing that group is what? Death. You're not going to do it. So it's like a shill. It's an excuse by the Israelis to, we can go wipe them out because they're just using people as human shields. Okay, so what are you going to do? Kill the shields. So it's very messy and very complex. Sorry. Anybody else?
In the last couple weeks, the Palestinians have been moved from one place to another by, they've been told, you know, get out of here, we're going to bomb here. Do you have any idea what the Israeli government is hoping to do? Do they just want the Palestinians to totally leave that in, you know, Gaza, West Bank, everything, and just clear out and leave it all to be Israel?
As far as I know, Israel doesn't seem to have a clear plan, but ethnic cleansing would be one of them, which is not killing everybody, but having them depart. So that's been one of the internal criticisms of the Israeli government, and criticisms that have been leveraged by different governments around the world. What do you plan to do? And in the meantime, the humanitarian crisis is now extreme. I mean, and some people can't move. I mean, they can't afford it. They can't do it, but health-wise. So I don't know what the end game is. Nobody's revealed it to me.
Forrest, I just want to take a moment to thank you for being here tonight and hope that the conversations continue. I'll share the list that he gives us, but I'm grateful for the ways in which you can take such a complicated history to begin to share that, to help us to see what's happening currently, which is complicated as well, has connections all throughout that history. And so thank you for your experience and being willing to give us a glimpse and to teach us as well some more about that history and that place of the world that is dear to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for being able to come out and engage. This is good.
I just have one thing